Rewatch Podcast presents the Wilder and Pryor Rewatch.
I don't believe this! Are you kidding?
Join us each week as we discuss the 4 films featuring comedy greats Gene Wilder and Richard Pryor.
The man's got something to say, let him say it. Of yours!
Silver Streak.
This is fabulous!
Stir Crazy.
Jesus! You could have mustache!
See No Evil, Hear No Evil.
This is a scandal! What do you mean I'm not white? Why didn't you tell me this before?
And Another You.
You screwed my brain.
Send your feedback to the rewatchpodcast@gmail.com. Like our Facebook page, facebook.com/rewatchpodcast, and follow us on Twitter @rewatchpod.
Just pick up the phone and call your superiors. Tell them I have the Rembrandt letters.
Today we're discussing Silver Streak, starring Gene Wilder, Richard Pryor, Jill Clayburgh, Patrick McGowan, Ned Beatty, Clifton James, Ray Walston, Stephen Girash, and Richard Keel. Directed by Arthur Hiller. Welcome back to the Rewatch Podcast. I'm Cory, and this vitamin E will really keep your pencil sharp.
And I'm Nathan, and son of a bitch!
Classic Wilder line.
I know. How are you, buddy?
Fantastic. So excited to be kicking off our Wilder Pryor rewatch.
Absolutely. I'm really excited to be here. I mean, these films that we're about to discuss, I mean, should we roll through the films that we're going to be talking about just quickly before we go too far, Cory?
Yeah.
So we're here to talk about the classic, Gene Wilder and Richard Pryor partnership. Obviously, Gene Wilder passed away, when was it earlier this year?
It was earlier this year, 2016.
Yeah, he passed away on the 29th of August, actually, which is my birthday, actually. We're here to celebrate, the great films that he collaborated with Richard Pryor on. Now, he only made 4 films with him. He did Silver Streak in 1976, and then he went on to do Stir Crazy in 1980. Then he went on and did See No Evil, Hear No Evil in 1989. And he also made another film in 91 called Another You. So we thought we'd kick off things with the 1976 film Silver Streak, as you say, directed by Arthur Hiller. So that's what we're going to talk about tonight.
Yeah, so let's begin where we always begin. Let's check out the trailer.
George Caldwell is taking the Silver Streak to Chicago.
First class? Yes, sir. Right this way.
He's a busy publisher who's taking a train for one reason only.
I just want to be bored.
Come on. Well, you're in for the ride of your life.
Yeah?
We just picked out a little chickie, my friend, and it's hug and munch all the way to Chicago.
What do you publish?
Oh, mostly nonfiction. Cookbooks, how-to-do-it books.
Very interesting. Are you married?
Divorced.
But in the next 3 days, he will fall in love. He will witness a murder and become involved in a bizarre international intrigue.
All right, listen, Buster, you're in trouble. And I mean big trouble. Because I'm reporting you. All right, enough's enough. If you're willing to forget it, I don't believe this. Are you kidding?
From an innocent passenger, George Caldwell will become a victim. A man who will be forced to risk his life in order to save it.
Hold it! Don't move or I'll shoot!
You've got a dead engineer and a runaway train that's going to hit Chicago in 15 minutes.
By plane, by train, by the edge of your seat. It's the most hilarious suspense ride of your life. Nothing can stop Silver Streak.
All right, welcome back. I hope you enjoyed that.
Yeah, so let's get into a bit of trivia about Silver Streak.
The film opened on December 8th, 1976, and it had a budget of $6.5 million, and it actually grossed $51.1 million. So this was a reasonably sized hit, wouldn't you say?
Definitely. It got pretty good praise from film critic Roger Ebert. It holds 88% approval rating on Rotten Tomatoes. So, yeah, I think people pretty much liked this movie when it came out, and I guess as we get into our discussion, we'll find out how much it holds up today.
It's one of those kind of films that I was actually a bit surprised when I read that it did so well, like box office-wise, because as much as I've heard of this film, I wouldn't say this film kind of came across my radar all that often.
I have seen all of the Wilder Pryor collaboration films except this one.
Even Another You, the one he did in 91?
Yep, I'd seen all the other three, but I never ever watched this one until now.
Interesting. Well, here you are, a very good opportunity to do it. Now, Colin Higgins, who is actually the writer of this film, has actually said that the lead role was actually written for George Segal. He also stated that the producers actually did not want Richard Pryor cast because Pryor had actually recently walked off a previous film that he did called The Bingo Long Travelling All-Stars and Motor Kings. He actually says that the producers at one stage considered casting another black actor as a backup. However, Pryor was actually very professional during the shoot of Silver Streak. So there you go.
It's funny how actors can get a reputation. Like, he walked off one film for whatever reason, so they're like, maybe we should have a backup, but whatever. He was actually supposed to appear in Blazing Saddles with Gene Wilder before this movie. He was supposed to play the character of Black Bart, but he ultimately didn't even get that role. So these two were very close to teaming up earlier than this film, but yeah, we're going to get into it, but Richard Pryor doesn't even show up in this movie until a good hour into it.
I know. I kept waiting for him, and I kept thinking, at what point is he going to show up? And then he does, which we'll talk about. But, I mean, without kind of going too deep into, like, gossip and innuendo and whatnot, but I know for a fact that Pryor was considered a reasonably difficult actor, like to deal with, like, on set, but he's also had quite a trouble behind the scenes. Like, obviously, he's one of the most influential stand-up, African-American comedians to ever live. So his star shone really, really bright back then. And to actually kind of get him in the movies was quite a coup. And I'm actually always a bit surprised by the amount of films and successes that Richard Pryor was. Like, he was not like a small movie star at all. Like, he appeared in quite a few very big films. I mean, just looking at his filmography now, he obviously did, Brewster's Millions, and he did Superman 3 in 1983. Harlem Nights he showed up with Eddie Murphy. He was in The Wiz in 78, and he did Car Wash in 76. He was in the Muppets movie in 79, and obviously the collaboration with Gene Wilder as well. But he's done 20 to 30 films, and he had quite a few successes. So I think the point I'm trying to make is that he was a very big star at the time, wouldn't you say?
Yeah, he knew his value for sure, and having him in your film would give you an audience, a built-in audience who wanted to go and see his stuff, because he was well known for his comedic performances and people would show up to see him.
Yeah, he was considered quite racy as well, wasn't he? Like he was kind of bordering on crude. Like if you ever kind of listened to his stand-up comedy, which I have in the past, I mean, there's a lot of swearing and a lot of cussing and a lot of kind of vulgarity kind of thing, but there's a lot of like on-point kind of social commentary as well within his kind of stand-up comedy. So he's considered like to be a really like important figure in that whole scene and movement. And I've always been a fan, like, without kind of going too deep, man, but I think I've probably seen Brewster's Millions 30 times in the last 20, 30 years. Like, it's kind of one of those films that's kind of always stuck with me, and I've always enjoyed him as a comedian and an actor. So yeah.
Yeah, exactly. He's part of a breed of comedians from this era who were well known because, they did do stand-up and they were out there with the people doing live shows, I'm talking about people like Robin Williams and Rodney Dangerfield. These were just well-known people and they were faces. So you get them in your comedy film, people are going to come out in droves to see it.
Now, there's a scene about halfway through the film where Wilder kind of puts on what's essentially like a blackface. Now, when the scene where Grover puts the shoe polish on George's face to make him appear to be black was first filmed, a white man was actually walked in and believed George was actually black. And apparently Richard Pryor was so uncomfortable with this scene and felt it would actually be funnier if a black man walked in and is not fooled at all. Now, apparently Pryor actually asked Arthur Hiller for a reshoot, but Hiller actually refused point blank. Pryor actually walked off the set and refused to return to filming until the scene was changed. And Hiller actually relented, and Pryor's idea was actually used for the final cut. It's a fun sequence, but it's kind of one of those interesting things that's a bit strange looking in today's context, wouldn't you say?
Yeah, but I'm going to say I think it's probably funnier the way that it actually ends up in the movie. So good call from Richard Pryor.
Good instincts, didn't he? Also, too, obviously, as we said before, the director of this film was Arthur Hiller. Now, Arthur Hiller is a name that you'll be hearing a little bit more of as we go through this series, because he did make Silver Streak in '76 with Pryor and Wilder, but he also went on to make See No Evil, Hear No Evil in 1989. He also made The Lonely Guy with Steve Martin, Outrageous Fortune with Bette Midler, and Taking Care of Business with Charles Grodin. And he also, even early in his career, he made the very famous and huge film, A Love Story with Ryan O'Neal, is that right?
I think so, yeah.
I remember that film being a very big film. He descended primarily from TV, being a workhorse TV director, working on such shows as The Third Man, Perry Mason, he did several episodes, Gunsmoke, The Rifleman, Alfred Hitchcock Presents, he did 17 episodes of that show. He went on to do Route 66, there's some Addams Family in there, so this guy is a very serious, knows what he's doing kind of director, and a bit of an interesting choice, yeah?
And I love this bit of trivia too about Gene Wilder, because in 3 of the 4 movies we're going to talk about here, Silver Streak, Stir Crazy, and See No Evil, Hear No Evil, Gene Wilder plays a character who is accused of a crime he didn't commit. That's 3 out of 4 of these. He also plays a character accused of a crime he didn't commit in The Frisco Kid and Hanky Panky. So that's 5 of his films he's taken on this persona. I think that is brilliant.
I don't quite know why he took on that role, because you're right. Like he just kind of has that face, doesn't he? Like he's quite an innocent kind of guy, but he's not really that innocent, is he?
No. Well, and I saw another bit of trivia where he actually ran into Cary Grant shortly after Silver Streak came out, and Cary Grant asked him if the script for it was based on North by Northwest, which Gene Wilder said he believes it actually is. And I'm like, yeah, when you think about it, this is kind of got that North by Northwest storyline to it.
Another thing that I want to mention is this film was all shot in Canada. They kind of present it as like America, though. They're going from like the West Coast to the East Coast, kind of, or I think they're going to Chicago or something like that. But the whole thing was shot in Canada, and they just kind of dressed the scenery to kind of make it look like America. Did you notice the cameo towards the end, or the Fred Willard cameo?
Yeah, he was the train station guy.
Yeah, I did kind of. I wasn't expecting him when I had no idea he was in it, and it's a straight role too. He's not trying to be funny at all.
He gets a little bit frantic.
He does get a little bit frantic, doesn't he? Yeah, you're right. Actually, now that I think about it, but essentially, it's a bit more of a like it's just an acting gig, isn't it? Like he's known so much for his like Christopher Guest appearances and comedy kind of roles, and it was just amusing to kind of see him show up. I just didn't expect it. That's all.
Well, and Tom and I were talking about him just earlier in Lois and Clark. He came in as the president of all characters, and a clone of the president as well. Very random.
Now, just another small bit of trivia as well is there's actually a bit of a James Bond connection with this film, isn't there?
What a glaring James Bond connection, if you will.
2 James Bond connections, might I add. Now, Clifton James and Richard Kiel both starred in a James Bond movie, twice reprising their respective characters. Now, James was actually in Live and Let Die and The Man with the Golden Gun as Sheriff Pepper, while Kiel as Jaws in The Spy Who Loved Me and Moonraker. Obviously, those films were the Roger Moore films, but they play very similar roles, don't they?
Well, the interesting thing is that the character that Richard Kiel plays in this, the character's name is Reese, and he's got big metal teeth that he attacks people with. This role is a whole year before he would show up as Jaws in The Spy Who Loved Me. That's crazy to me. When I saw it, I'm like, why is he playing Jaws in this movie? And then to find out it was even before Bond, it blew my mind.
I actually didn't realize that until you mentioned it just now, and I'm trying to process that information. It's like, well, because I've only ever known this guy as like Bond, yeah. He actually, I think he died not long ago. Actually, now that I think about it, yeah, like I think maybe earlier this year.
Well, the only other thing I know him from is Happy Gilmore. He plays the guy who gets the nail in his head.
Yeah, that's right. He does too. He actually died a couple of years ago on September 10th, 2014. And when you actually look at his filmography, he kind of appeared in quite a bit. He was in a Twilight Zone episode, and he was in Man from U.N.C.L.E., and he was in I Dream of Jeannie for an episode as well. And Gilligan's Island he showed up on, and The Monkees. And like his career as an actor stems back to 1957 in an uncredited role in a movie called The D.I., but probably more predominantly from 1960 onwards. He's kind of probably someone that I shouldn't kind of write off as like only the Bond guy. He's done quite a vast career, truthfully.
I think it still goes back to Jaws in Bond. Every time you see him, he's like, this Jaws from Bond.
Now, also, too, Henry Mancini was the composer on this film, and I got to say, I thought the music was actually pretty stirring, actually, and I thought the soundtrack was pretty good for this film.
Yeah, I agree. It's pretty fitting.
Yeah, it's good.
Shall we get into the main discussion, I guess?
Let's do it, mate.
Okay, Silver Streak. As we were saying, Richard Pryor doesn't show up in this movie until a good hour into it, so we actually begin with the whole setup, and I really like this idea of having a guy he's on a train, he's taking a cross-country train, and he's going to get mixed up in stuff.
Does he ever, mate? And as you say, Richard Pryor doesn't show up till like 50 minutes, and he's on the poster, man. Mm-hmm. He's only he's probably got about 30 minutes of screen time in this film, and like his role is, I think it's kind of significant. He does play like a key role in the development of the plot and whatnot, but it's interesting. He almost feels like a bit of like an extended kind of cameo than like a star of the film. You know what I mean?
Exactly. But you know, this movie is never in a rush to go anywhere. It lets it play out. It sets up characters. It just moves along at a steady pace. And, you know, some people might say, okay, that makes the movie a bit slow. But for me, I don't know. I was just happy to go for the ride, and I think it unfolds the story nicely.
And it kind of unfolds the ride in some relatively unusual ways that you don't expect. You mentioned to me that you'd watched this film, and I texted you and said, what was the film like? Like, did you enjoy it? You said it was good. There was some twists and turns I didn't expect, and I kind of thought, that's interesting. You kind of said that. So I kind of, when I was watching the film, I kept kind of wondering, what are these twists and turns that you kind of mentioned to me? And it certainly goes in some directions that I absolutely did not expect. I mean, it's kind of a comedy. It's almost a bit of like a parody as well, but it's also like a farce at the same time. Like, it's a strange movie, but it's kind of fun. And as you say, I just kind of let the story kind of wash over me and just accepted what was kind of happening. But it was kind of fun to meet book editor George Caldwell, traveling, you know, from, as you say, from Los Angeles to Chicago, and he's going for his sister's wedding aboard a train called the Silver Streak. On board, George actually meets a vitamin salesman named Bob Sweet, who is actually Ned Beatty. Now, Ned Beatty is kind of one of those names that you may not know him, but I swear, man, you've seen him in almost everything. And he's also one of the, you probably heard him as well. He was in, he's probably most famous for, he was in Deliverance, wasn't he?
Deliverance is what I was going to say. That's what I always remember, the squeal like a pig. Ooh.
But he's also the voice in Toy Story 3, the bad guy, Lots of Huggin' Bear. And I remember when I was watching Toy Story 3, I thought the casting of the bear was great because it was like this southern accent, and they really kind of stirred the pot a little bit from the southern perspective. So when I heard that they got Ned Beatty for the role, I thought, that's pretty clever casting from their perspective. He's got a really great voice, and he's kind of someone that you wouldn't necessarily expect as much with that kind of role, but I think he does pretty well in this film, and he plays a strange character. Like he's borderline a bit creepy, isn't he?
Yeah, he comes up to George, and he's talking about how he talks his boss into letting him take the train instead of flying around the country. And it's kind of like a ruse because he feels like taking the train, it takes a bit longer. There's the passenger cars, he can meet women, and it's something about the motion of the train movement, and the women get all hot and heavy. And George is like, oh, yeah, whatever. And Sweet tries to put the moves on this woman, Hilly, and she's not having a bar of it.
Hey, keep in mind, our introduction to Hilly is when Scatman Crothers, who is taking George to his like train, his first class train deck, and he goes into like the cabin, all right? And as Scatman Crothers is kind of explaining the how the cabin works to George, he opens this door that isn't locked.
Yeah, it's like a partition or something.
It's like a partition, and he goes through the door, and there is Jill Clayborne half naked in like a nightie. And obviously Wilder is like, oh, geez, excuse me, pardon me, like the door's sticking and I can't get it to lock and all this kind of stuff. But she doesn't really react in like a go away kind of point of view. She's very happy for Wilder to kind of stare at her. Yeah,
she's like into it. She's just like, all right, he's just walked in on me half naked. This is cool. But that's great because the Sweet's trying to put the moves on her, and she like dumps a drink in his lap, and the next thing she's talking to George, and the two of them really hit it off, and it's quite funny actually because they start to head back to the room, and they know they've got adjoining rooms.
Yeah, is that the bit where you're going to say when he walks past and he talks to Beatty and he says, you know what, you're right.
I think it is the motion, yeah. And he's sitting there alone. He's like, oh my God. Oh, it's great. I think it's just a great setup, and it's just slow burn, and they sit there for a while and they talk and everything, and they get to know each other. So it's not like they're just jumping straight into bed with each other, but they have a few drinks and get to know each other a little bit before they go for that.
You know what though, like some of that early stuff with Jill Clayborne could have done with like some tightening, like the edit. I mean, it does drag on for maybe a little bit too long, and there's some cheesy kind of dialogue in there between the kind of two. Like they're obviously trying to like butter each other up a little bit to try and kind of set the scene for what's essentially meant to be like the romance of the film, isn't it? And it's kind of interesting also seeing Wilder as like a romantic leading man. Like, like it's not necessarily the thing that I kind of think about too often with him as an actor, and it's kind of interesting to see him kind of stretch his acting chops a bit to try and get to that place, and I think he does his best. Yeah,
I think so. I think it works quite nicely, and it sets up that the two of them in a way are in the publishing business. He says he's I guess like a proofreader or something like that. And
have you ever done a sex manual?
No, right? Like, ugh. But she is like sort of like a secretary kind of person for this recluse. He's releasing a book on Rembrandt, and he's got like some big news about some Rembrandt paintings and stuff, which is going to be in this new book. It kind of just sets all that up just a little bit before, we get into the romance, and they have the partition taken down in their room, so they got nice big space, and they start getting into it a little bit.
They do, but when they're kind of, getting all hot and heavy, things are kind of happening, and then out of nowhere, George sees a dead body dangling outside the window of the compartment, and then the body actually falling away. But he's apparently very drunk at the time, and Hilly insists that he must have imagined it. And we get some great kind of Wilderisms during this scene with like Wilder kind of yelling and screaming and like, I've seen it. And he insists on having to like lie down, like, oh, I'm feeling faint and all that kind of stuff. And as you say, like Hilly just insists that he just imagined it, but like the audience knows that he didn't imagine it. He saw a body. There was a body there. It was dangling. And this sets George like spiraling.
George. Mm-hmm. What would happen if you treated an azalea like a nasturtium?
Ah. Now this is the really interesting part.
George, did you see it? What? Did you see that man?
What man?
There was a man hanging outside this window. He was shot in the head.
What?
Hilly, a dead man fell off the roof. I saw it. His coat was stuck.
Oh.
George.
Oh. I should do something. I should report it. Maybe they could stop the train.
George, I'm sure you saw something. You probably saw a kid's kite or an old newspaper out. Look, like that. You see, George, it could have been anything out there.
But his eyes were so clear.
I think they were clearer than your head. You imagined this, George?
I didn't. I know I didn't.
Well, then why don't you call the conductor and tell him your story?
I feel dizzy.
No, here. Lie down here, George.
Oh.
Whew. If this is what the DTs are like,
I'm going to give up the bottle for life.
The mind plays funny tricks on you all the time. Now, you know that, George. Come on, relax. relax. It's okay.
It sure is a pretty song.
Yes, it is.
You're very beautiful, Hilly.
I like you too, George.
I think that Wilder plays drunk pretty well throughout this scene, you know? Even just going back to the room, he sort of like stumbles backwards into this like Mexican woman's compartment. This woman starts shrieking that he's a rapist.
That's right. And keep in mind too, they've got this gag in the film too that the hallways are too narrow for two people to kind of get past
And
all
there's
the
a lot
time.
of fat guys walking around as well.
That's exactly right. So you'll get like Gene Wilder like walking up the hallway and you'll see someone coming towards him and there's just no room. You can't like get two people down. So he keeps having to like lean hard against the wall to get someone past him, or he has to like go into like someone's compartment. And as you say, he goes into some Mexican woman who instantly starts shrieking rape like straight away.
And it's funny, it comes back later. I think he's like running away with a gun or something, and that woman's there. She just shrieks, "Ah, rapist!" and runs off. And you're like, what? What a weird gag.
They also go to kind of great lengths to show that the train is a bit of a party kind of boat as well. Like a lot of shenanigans goes on this train. Like I think right at the start of the film, there's like a group of people that all have like election or victory hats on, and they're there for a party, aren't they? The Silver Streak is, it's booze and it's women and it's food, and yes, it's a long journey, but it's a party at the same time.
Yeah, they also randomly set up that there's like spear gun salesmen on board, and they've got like all these cardboard cutouts of this woman holding the spear gun and stuff, and that comes back like 40 minutes later, and you're like, wow, they really set that up at the beginning, didn't they?
So we have George, who sees the dead body outside the window. We kind of meet these other people, Johnson, Winey, and Reese. They're like heavies, aren't they? Like tough guys, you know, and they're there kind of to do a job. And George actually goes to Professor Schreiner's room to actually see what's kind of occurred.
Yeah.
And, you know, because he's not really convinced that nothing has happened. So Hilly essentially says, well, George, if you can't be convinced, why don't you just go down the hall and see for yourself? So George does exactly that. George goes to Schreiner's room and he gets into an altercation with Richard Keel. And this is a curveball. I did not expect this. He gets thrown off the train. And I didn't expect it when I was watching it. I thought, really? They're really going to do this?
I know, right?
I know. Did you expect it?
Not at all. It's such a bizarre sequence because, yeah, you know, he sees Schreiner's picture on the book. This is Hilly's employer. Yeah, he goes to find out what's going on. Schreiner, I think it comes up later, but Schreiner's there. And you're like, what? No, we saw his dead body fall off. It plays out as it moves on. But yeah, Reese comes out. This is Richard Keel playing the character, yes, that he would play a year later for James Bond. And yeah, he even has the same moves where he tries to like move in and bite you with those big metal teeth and throws him out of the train. I'm like, hang on, this movie's called Silver Streak. I thought the whole movie was going to take place on the train. But no, he gets thrown off and he comes across this woman on a farm and she's going to fly him into, I think it's Kansas City or something like that. So they manage to overtake the train and he can get back on. It is a bizarre sequence.
It's a really bizarre, and that's where I get my opening line was son of a bitch, right? Now, he gets, you know, spoiler alert for later on in the film, but this is not the only time he gets thrown off the train.
Crazy.
And every time he falls out, he yells, son of a bitch! It's quite funny, but it's also a bit slightly concerning as well. So, no, you're dead right. He meets a farmer named Rita Babtree, I think her name is, and it's played by this woman named Lucille Benson. There's this whole sequence with, like, cows and him, like, milking a cow, and they somehow commandeer, like, some kind of plane, and he gets like, ahead of the train, and when the train stops at some stop, he then gets back on it, yeah?
Yeah, and that's the end of that sequence. We never see the woman again. It's like, okay, weird. But yeah, you know, he gets back on, and like I said, Schreiner's there, and Hilly's just like, oh yeah, there's all, you know, this is my boss, it's all good. This guy Devereaux, who was kind of set up earlier, as this rich guy, art dealer.
Isn't he one of the cabins that George walks into, like, unannounced when he can't get down the hallway because he sees a fat guy walking down?
Yeah.
And he walks into Devereaux's and he says, "Excuse me, pardon me." And he does this, like, lame thing where he like, knocks on the wall and goes, yeah, I'm checking something. And then just goes straight back up the hall and apologizes. And that's our introduction to Devereaux. But you don't really realize that he's kind of in on the plot. Now, I just wanted to ask you a question. Roger Devereaux is played by Patrick McGowan. Now, Patrick McGowan is known for a very famous show from the 60s called The Prisoner. Now, have you ever been introduced to that before, Cory?
No, I've never seen it.
But do you know the thing I'm talking about?
No, I really know nothing about it. I don't really know much about Patrick McGowan.
Oh, okay, fair. He showed up in Scanners as well, which was directed by David Cronenberg in 1981. But he's kind of had a bit of, he's got a very, like, he's quite an intense kind of actor, and I think you can kind of see that coming through in Silver Streak. He's a pretty good choice for Roger Devereaux, actually.
Yeah, and this is where the whole plot starts coming out, because Devereaux says, "Oh, it's just a misunderstanding. I'm sorry about Reese. He kind of overreacted about this," and they apologize to him and say, "Look, obviously he's not dead. Shriner's right here." And they get talking about the Rembrandt letters. George had stumbled across these letters quite by accident when he picked up the book that Shriner asked Hilly to hold on to. So he knows about them, but yeah, he figures that, okay, well, Shriner's there, so I guess there's really nothing going on here.
Even though he got thrown off the train, I'd be pissed.
I know, right?
Like super pissed. Like, what are you doing? Keep in mind, too, also that one of the heavies is a guy named Ray Walston. Ray Walston is an actor that you've probably recognized as well. He was in Star Trek, and he was also in, a very famous 60s science fiction show called My Favorite Martian. He was the Martian in that show, and he was in Fast Times at Ridgemont High and various kind of other things. And yeah, again, like, there was quite a few faces in this film that I recognized and, as very kind of well-known kind of actors. So yeah, so anyway.
And even he's like apologizing and stuff, and Shriner's just like, "Oh, I'm going to go back to my room and have this glass of scotch. It's all good." And George goes to the club car or whatever, but as soon as he leaves the room, Devereaux just backhands Hilly right across the face, like in old school, like 50s movie style. Just, "Damn you, woman." And you're like, whoa.
It's something that I do want to talk about. I don't want to kind of harp on it because I don't really want to get into like a big PC kind of discussion. But I couldn't help but notice there was some very like old kind of ideas in this film. Like, did you notice that all the servants were like African-American actors and there was no real reason to kind of make them all black actors? Like, you know what I mean? They could have cast some African-American guys in just straight up kind of supporting roles in this film, but they chose not to. Like, you've got Scatman Crothers. It made me feel slightly uncomfortable when I was watching it, just slightly.
Even when Richard Pryor comes into it, he's in the back of a police car because he's a thief. And a self-professed thief at that. Like, he's just like, I'm a thief. And he's like, okay, this is not very progressive for African-American community.
No, and it's like, as you say, like there's racial politics involved, and there's also kind of like sexual kind of politics as well, because the treatment of men against women in this film is not great, is it? Like the way women are kind of perceived and kind of what their like function is like in the story. They really are kind of like almost like eye candy in some kind of ways. And don't get me wrong, like I know George does his best to try and treat them with respect, but even he kind of doesn't really jump to their defense, does he? Not really.
No. Well, and we get back to Sweet as well, because George is just getting drunk in the club car, after his experience of being thrown off the train and all that. He's just getting pissed. And Sweet comes in, starts talking to him about it, and then reveals that he's actually an FBI agent named Stevens.
Again, now, like, talk about curveballs. We had the curveball of, getting thrown off the train. I did not expect Sweet to be an FBI agent, did you?
He just comes rolling in, and you're just like, man, you were really playing your character up as this, like, womanizing vitamin salesman drunk. But no, you're an FBI agent undercover. And it turns out that Devereaux has been implicated in a whole bunch of crimes, mostly to do with authenticating fake Rembrandt paintings in order to profit from the sale of them, I guess. And the whole thing is that Schreiner's book was going to uncover that at least 2 of the paintings he authenticated are not real. And these Rembrandt letters prove that. So he killed Schreiner in order to stop this information coming out, swapped him out with a guy who looks exactly like him, and then that guy was going to go and say that, oh, I was mistaken and I'm not going to release my book now.
That's Devereaux's kind of very long-winded plan. So that's okay, though. It's a movie. It's not real. So you just accept it. Stevens then kind of warns that George could be killed by Devereaux too, because he told Devereaux that Schreiner was actually murdered. But then Reese actually kills Stevens, who he thought was actually George. Now, a conductor actually enters George's room and sees Stevens' body and George holding Stevens' gun and thinking that George is actually the killer, and he kind of freaks out a little bit. Now, Reese finds George and chases him all over the train, first inside and then on top. And when Reese is about to shoot George, he's actually impaled by George with a spear gun. Then dropped down into the mountains.
It's it's one of those sequences, isn't it? It's just a crazy off the wall set of circumstances that just goes way awry.
Yeah. We then get our second being thrown off the train. George is then knocked off the train by an overhead signal. So once again, George has kind of found himself in this like impossible kind of scenario. He's met a woman that he likes, who's involved in all this craziness, and he doesn't really want to get involved, but he's kind of doing his best to try and just make it right. Yeah,
he ends up at a police station, and of course the police chief is just this hapless dimwit who doesn't know what he's talking about, and they have a good back and forth. You know, it's like a classic comedy thing where he's saying one thing and the guy's not quite understanding what he's talking about, and George is all scattered as well, so he's forgetting to mention certain things, and it's an interesting back and forth. But yeah, it's your typical sheriff who is an idiot and doesn't understand where George is coming from.
I actually quite liked that scene when George is talking to the sheriff and he's like telling him like this impossible kind of story of, and then this happened and then this person got involved and then I shot him, and then like the sheriff kind of looks at him and says, "You shot him? Are you sure about that?" And he goes, "Yes, I shot him, but I didn't mean to shoot him. It was like it happened." And then he gave all these like reasons as to why it happened, and the sheriff's just like, "Okay, you just need to be quiet."
Well, he starts bringing up Rembrandt and the letters and stuff, and he goes, "Well, who's Rembrandt?" "Well, Rembrandt's dead." "So that's 4 dead people." He goes, No, Rembrandt is a painter." He's like, they get all confused like that. It's a pretty good back and forth, good comedic bit.
You kind of you forget just how skilled a comedian Gene Wilder is. Like his timing's great and his delivery is great as well, and he's got that kind of look about him as well. Like he really was quite a great actor. I thought he was anyway.
Yeah, for sure. And of course, you know, the sheriff gets a phone call about, they think that George killed Stevens on the train, and he's like, "Oh my God, I've got him here. He's right here with me." So in an effort to get away and try to get back to the train, he has no choice but to hold the sheriff and his deputy at gunpoint and steal their cruiser. And of course, in the back is an under arrest Richard Pryor comes into it, playing the character of Grover.
Dumb, stupid bastard.
Who are you? I'm a thief, man. Take it easy. If I ain't gonna freak you out no more, how about handing me them keys up there? I'd like to get these cuffs off.
Sorry.
That's real nice the way you handled yourself back there with old Oliver. I was listening. What they want you for anyway, man?
Murder.
Drop me off anywhere along in there, okay? I don't mess with the big M.
I'm not stopping anywhere. Do you know the roads around here?
Yeah.
Well, maybe we could make a deal. I'm not a murderer. I'm trying to prevent one. But in about a minute, we're going to be surrounded by cops. If you can get us out of it, you'd be doing both of us a favor. What do you think?
I think you better make a right up here and then a sharp left. I'm coming over. Jesus Christ, man. That's how you murdered your victims? Put them in a car and bounced them to death?
Sorry.
Try my ass. You dangerous. Proves one thing, though. You don't do this for no living.
No, I don't.
All right. Just take it easy. I'm gonna take over in a minute. Don't make no more sudden moves, okay? I'm gonna check with headquarters and find out the game plan for the night.
He said he was going to get back on that train. That means he has to cross into Kansas on 120, 116, or 350. Now, I figure if we put stakeouts on all of those roads, we'll get that fella. The first should be at the junction of Taubman's Road on 116.
What are you slowing down for?
There's a truck up ahead.
So, there's a truck up ahead. We the man. Let's turn on the siren. Get them hippies off the road. Put some foot in it. Move it. Oh, God!
Would you like to drive for a while?
Grover T. Muldoon. You're dead right, man. We meet Richard Pryor, and I liked him when he showed up. He definitely put a bit of energy back into the film. I think we mentioned earlier on just how complicated the story is, so it was actually quite refreshing to see Richard Pryor. I kind of wonder if audiences were expecting him like that, because you're right, it takes a while for him to show up.
Yeah, you're right. He sort of injects an energy into this film because it's difficult to introduce one of the main characters of the film, really. And you said it's more like a glorified walk-on role, if you will, like a glorified cameo, because he comes in so late. But yeah, he comes in and they set him up as a main character of this film, and I think he's just important to this film, even though he doesn't show up until about that hour mark.
No, you're right. George and Grover actually work together. They kind of work out pretty quickly that they can help each other out. So they work together to reach the train in Kansas City. Now, also, let's just say right now, too, that it's set up pretty quickly, too, that Pryor's character is a bit of a, for use of a better word, but like a con man, isn't he? Like a bit of a shyster. Like, will kind of do anything to kind of get ahead, yeah?
Yeah, he's a career criminal in a way. So he helps George get away from the police so they can get back to the train. They're at the train station. They are ahead of the train, but there's like wanted signs for George everywhere. So he comes up with this plan to, disguise him as a black man by rubbing shoe polish on his face.
Yes, and again, like I didn't expect that. It was a bit
blackface, I mean, come on.
I know, you could just never do that now at all. But in saying that, though, like, there is like a narrative kind of purpose for it. I don't think they're necessarily being disrespectful in this situation with it. I mean, the only reason they do it is to try and get past the police, and as soon as they get past the police, he rubs it off and goes back to being George. Yeah,
I'd like to think that Richard Pryor sort of like helped Gene Wilder develop this situation into being something actually quite funny, because he's talking to him and telling him how he should walk. Like, you walk like an uptight white man, like you gotta lay loose like a black man, and he gives him all these tips. So it does lead to the funny scene, like we mentioned in the trivia, where he's, trying his best to be black, and he's all you white boys got sticks up your ass, and the shoe shine guy from outside walks in and is not fooled at all by this ruse. It's funny.
And you're right, like he turns it up to 11, doesn't he? Like the whole kind of black stereotypes, everything. And you know what? He kind of gets by, doesn't he? He just walks by the police, and next thing you know, he's kind of passing. There's a really funny bit too, actually, where I think Pryor, like Wilder walks past, and then Pryor walks behind Wilder. But while Wilder goes ahead, disguised as a black man, but Pryor stops to talk to the policeman and sort of says something like who you after or something like that, and he kind of and like Pryor makes some kind of wise ass crack about it. It's very funny. It's quite good.
It's a good back and forth, really.
Yeah.
They end up back on the train, and they actually meet up with the steward, Scatman Crothers, and they actually end up in a bit of a shootout after George is captured, and they kind of have this extended sequence where Devereaux lays out his plan to them.
It's a strange sequence, truthfully, the whole shootout thing. It happens quite randomly, and all these trained assassins, they're not very good shots, are they? The whole movie logic thing, they're just like firing kind of randomly, and this like random kind of action sequence.
Again, they are forced off the train because of this shootout. Wilder and Pryor actually have to jump off the train this time. They don't get kicked off, at least, so
yeah,
they voluntarily leave the train. And yeah, they meet up with like this special forces team who are like, yeah, we know you didn't kill anybody. We've been after Devereaux for ages. And because Devereaux, of course, laid out his whole plan, classic bad guy mistake, he can pass on that he's actually going to get off at Rockdale and not Chicago to sort of like throw the police off track. And this is also going to lead to what the big crescendo of the film is, because they stop at Rockdale. The police actually stop the train before it gets to Rockdale.
Yep.
All the passengers get off, so all the innocent bystanders are out of the way, and the police have a bit of a shootout with Devereaux and his men, which it's quite a weird sequence, because Devereaux's trying to get away. He ends up at the front, puts the pedal down for the train, so it has to keep going. They also disconnected all the emergency brakes earlier. And then in a bit of a scuffle, Devereaux sort of half falls out of the train and then gets his head taken off by this cargo train or whatever.
I know. And there's this scene where he's in Wilder kind of looking out the window, and Jill Clayburgh kind of goes to look, and he says, don't look. It's fine. It's fine. Like there's nothing wrong with it. But it's a strange sequence. It's like this action sequence with like there's helicopters. Like there's some money involved with that, man. Mm-hmm. Like helicopters chasing the train, and this like shootout that's kind of happening from Devereaux. And you're dead right. He kind of ends up putting like a weight on the accelerator on the train. Devereaux gets killed, but then obviously Devereaux's taken out. But then there's the problem of stopping the Silver Streak.
Exactly.
And that's the end result of the film. So you've got Wilder, Pryor, Claybore, I think Scatman Crothers
is there, yeah.
Yeah, he's still there. They soon realise that the Silver Streak is out of control. The police end up having to kind of contact like the rail authorities or whatever it is. And it's got this great sequence with, Fred Willard, who is he's a very funny actor by trade, but he's playing it. He does have a few funny lines, but he's trying to play it straight. I feel it is anyway.
I think in the fact that he is playing it straight is what makes it funny. Because he's just like, the train can't be a runaway because, why wouldn't the driver just stop the train? There is no driver, but then there would be emergency brakes. Yeah, they've cut the emergency brakes. Oh, okay, maybe there is a problem.
Isn't there this whole like back and forth too about like my boss is at lunch? Like I can't get him kind of thing.
And that just like the train is going to crash into the station in like 15 minutes. And that's when he starts getting frantic and he has to like run out, find his supervisor or whoever.
Doesn't he like run into like a restaurant, and this like wise ass kind of like a waitress kind of talks him up a little bit, and like he like holds her and like shakes her a little bit and sort of says, "Where is he? I don't have time for this." Exactly.
Yeah, it's not bad.
So the end result is Wilder and Pryor end up making their way towards the head of the train to try and see if they can kind of get to the brake. Now, Scatman Crothers actually gives them a bit of like inside knowledge about the train itself and a way to stop it. And he actually advises to try and disengage like a locking kind of system between the trains. Essentially what he's trying to do is to disengage the motor from the rest of the train. So the rest of the train stops, but only the first two carriages continue. So you got this scene where Pryor and Wilder and Claybore, and they're kind of like, Wilder is trying to be like an action hero. He's trying to be John McClane, isn't he?
Yeah, it's weird. I don't know why they have him do such like an actiony, hanging out the train, trying to uncouple the carriages and all this stuff. It doesn't quite fit.
To put a long story short, they uncouple the trains, but the train does get to the station and they stage this big crash sequence, don't they?
Very unusual.
Which was quite exciting. I thought it was anyway.
After seeing it, like I looked it up and I was like, what's this all about? Like, why would they spend so much money doing this sequence? It has to be like miniatures or something. No, they actually built a big replica station on a soundstage and crashed a train through it. It's crazy.
Wow. And I felt like you kind of felt that it was real as well. And if that was done, if that was done today, it would just be VFX, wouldn't it?
Yeah, but I thought it looked great.
I thought it looked great, and I thought they did a really good job. And even though this film is not one that I had heard of or read too much about, like over the years, like as I said, it was very successful at the box office. So obviously kind of audiences kind of responded, didn't they?
Yeah, for sure. And it's a good ending too, quite frankly. As much as I wasn't a fan of Wilder hanging out of the train, having the train crash into the station was pretty good. And then Grover, he steals a car.
He steals a sports car.
It's
That's
like,
on display.
just a display car there. Nicks that, off he goes.
And that's the last you see of
Grover. And then George and Hilly decide that they're gonna leave together, and that's kind of how it ends.
Kind of surprised they didn't try and make a sequel with these characters, considering it was like so successful. And the characters are maybe strong enough to kind of do it. I don't know quite how you do it. I don't know, like, isn't like right at the end, Clayball says to Wilder, like, I want to like go to a garden with you and read some gardening kind of manuals or something like that with him.
It's weird.
It's true.
Bizarre.
I don't know about you, but next time I'm going to take the bus.
Maybe I'm crazy, but it looks as if it's grinning.
Yeah, like the cat who swallowed the canary.
Where's Grover?
I don't know.
Take it easy, killer. Stay loose.
What's he doing?
He's crazy.
Crazy? He's got the right idea. Let's get out of here and go to a park.
A park?
Yeah. I want to lie back on the grass and have you teach me some more about gardening.
What are your ratings for this film, Corey?
I really enjoyed this film. And like I said, the pace of it, even though it's long and it's drawn out, I liked it. I thought it was quite good. The characters were developed really well. The story is a bit confusing at times, but it got there. It let you know what was going on. So, I really enjoyed this one. So I'm going to give this 7 room partitions out of 10.
I'm kind of with you. I'm probably maybe slightly less than you. I'm probably hovering at about 6 Grover stealing sports cars out of 10. I'm kind of around that mark. I did enjoy the film. I thought it was fun seeing Wilder play like a role that is maybe I'm not really used to. I mean, he's so famous. Like, he's like beyond famous. Willy Wonka from, Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, like a role that is like synonymous with cinema and will be for the next, 100 years. Like, it's just, he's a giant as far as acting is concerned. So it's pretty interesting to kind of see him in kind of this role. And I did, as I said to you, I did have some kind of issues with the whitewashing of the cast. Not that I really play that game all that much, but I did enjoy the story. I did find it kind of interesting, and there was a lot of twists and turns that I didn't quite expect. As I said, I'm probably hovering at around 6.5 out of 10 for me. It is definitely a recommend. Watch it. Don't expect an amazing thing. It's a comedy first, I think, and then it's kind of like a thriller. To be truthful too, man, like, one of my issues with the film is that the film is slightly confused with what it's trying to be. Like, one minute you've got men walking down a hallway that can't get past each other. That's clearly meant to be quite funny. And then the next thing you've got, all these heavies trying to be badasses and this convoluted story about art letters and stuff.
Yeah, no, I'm definitely there with you. It is kind of all over the place in that aspect. But, I don't know. It still engaged me for most of the film, and recommend from me too. So
yeah, definitely. So no.
Okay, so next week we are moving on to the next collaboration between Wilder and Pryor, and that is Stir Crazy from 1980.
Absolutely, a film that I have never seen.
Yeah, we'll find out.
So that's it for this episode of the Rewatch Podcast. Keep up with listener interaction by joining our Facebook page at facebook.com/Rewatch Podcast, and follow the show on Twitter at Rewatch Pod, and visit our webpage rewatchpodcast.podomatic.com. incompetech.com.
And remember, you can always write us an email or record a voice message and send it to the rewatchpodcast@gmail.com. And also, if you've enjoyed the show, please consider giving us a rate and review on iTunes. It's always helpful. And you can help support the Rewatch Podcast by heading over to patreon.com/rewatchpodcast and make a monthly contribution as little as $1. Help us keep the lights on. And every single episode of the Rewatch Podcast is available on YouTube. So just search the Rewatch Podcast and subscribe today. All right, well, great start to this little 4-episode set we're getting into. Thank you for joining me.
Thank you very much. It's fun as always.
And I would just say, until next time, take it easy, killer. Stay loose.
And you stupid, ignorant son of a bitch, dumb bastard. Jesus Christ, I've met some dumb bastards in my time, but you outdo them all. I don't mean that personally to anyone.
The Rewatch Podcast is not associated with the copyright holders of these films, and no copyright infringement is intended.
Now listen to me. I know that this is a delicate situation, but let's talk a little sense.
The use of any and all copyrighted material is only for parody, news analysis, critique, or educational purposes as provided in Title 17, aka Fair Use. Music provided by Kevin McCloud at incompetech.com. Copyright 2016, The Rewatch Podcast.
I hope you had fun, because I ain't gonna have no fun.
Hi, Rewatch Podcast listeners. I'm Corey.
I'm Tom.
And I'm Nathan.
First off, let me say that we have all had a blast doing the Rewatch Podcast. Every week, we put out another episode for free for you. And although we enjoy these discussions with each other, we truly do this for you guys out there in podcast land.
That's right, Corey. But we are here today to tell you about Patreon. Every week, there are costs involved in podcasting about film and television, including hosting and bandwidth charges, our own personal internet usage, and film or show rentals and purchases. So, we're asking you to become a Patreon supporter.
If you can afford as little as $1 to throw our way per month, it would really help us keep the lights on. And if you want to send $100 our way every month, we wouldn't turn that down either. But it's your choice, and we appreciate the support you bring.
As always, we strive to bring you the best quality shows we can create, and we hope that you enjoy them. So head on over to patreon.com/rewatchpodcast to become one of our patrons and show your support for the Rewatch Podcast.
And if we get enough patrons, we may even be able to produce exclusive content just for the supporters in the form of simply getting episodes before the main feed release, or even bonus film discussion episodes as a thank you for your support. The website again is patreon.com/rewatchpodcast.
Thanks, everyone.